Maya only booked the last-minute taxi because the train app showed a 42-minute delay, and the platform smelled like burnt wires and old rain. It was a Wednesday night that already felt like Thursday, the kind of stretched-out time that grows thin at the edges. A presentation had kept her late. Her manager's quick feedback turned into a 2-hour screen share, and by the time she shut down her laptop, the office cleaners were pushing mops and humming to themselves, like they were the only ones awake. The city looked unusually hollow when she stepped outside. No crowds, only parked cars with dew on their hoods, and a distant siren that did not seem to move closer or farther away. She called a taxi instead of a rideshare because the app kept spinning, and a yellow cab felt like the safest, most boring choice in the world. She told herself that boring was good. Boring would take her home, up 3 flights of stairs, into a hot shower and a recent episode of whatever show people were pretending to love. When the cab glided around the corner and stopped, she saw the interior light flick on, and a hand lift from the driver's seat, a familiar gesture that said, "Get in, it is fine." The license placard on the dash gleamed for a second in the reflection, but the angle made the name hard to read. The meter was already ticking even though the car had not moved. She hesitated, then reminded herself that a city at 1 a.m. is half fear and half imagination. She opened the door and slid in. The seat felt colder than the air outside. "Hi, Maya?" the driver asked, voice low and even, like a late-night radio host. She blinked. "Yeah, how did you know?" He tapped the mounted phone on the dash without taking his eyes off the windshield. "Dispatch," he said, his hand sat perfectly at 10 and 2. No fidgeting, no chatter. "Address?" She gave it. He repeated it back, each number clear, then pulled away from the curb as smoothly as if the street had been oiled. For the first 3 blocks, she watched the water droplets chase one another across the window and told herself she would be home in 15 minutes. Sometimes the lie you need most is the one a city tells you every night. You know where you are. You know where you are going. They came to a toll plaza that looked abandoned except for the single green arrow over the far right lane. The rest of the booths were dark, shuttered, red X's glaring like warnings that forgot how to speak. The cab rolled to a gentle stop at the painted line, even though no one stood inside the lit booth. Maya leaned forward, expecting the driver to reach for a ticket or tap a transponder, something normal. He didn't move. He kept both hands on the wheel, knuckles pale in the greenish glow of the dash. The rain softened for a moment, turning from a wall into strings. "Do we need to pay?" Maya asked. "Collected later," he said. "Cameras." She followed his gaze and saw a small black dome mounted near the light. It faced down into the lane, blank and opaque, reflecting only a dim hint of the taxi's hood. "Okay," she said, because okay is the word you use when you have nothing else. They didn't move. 30 seconds stretched into a minute, the kind that's long enough to become a story if you survive it. "Why are we waiting?" She tried again. "Gate," he said. "It's up," she countered, because it was. The barrier arm sat vertically, rain dripping off its tip like a metronome. He breathed out slow, controlled, and the exhale fogged the windshield from the inside, even though the defroster hummed. "Give it a second," he said, and that was the first time Maya noticed something that had been true since she climbed in. The dashboard clock hadn't advanced. It still read 1:13, not 1:13 in odd seconds, just 1:13 in a stubborn permanent way. Her phone remained stuck on 107. She glanced at the radio. The station ID that normally slid across the tiny screen had frozen midward. A feeling like cold water ran behind her ribs. "Sir, I'd like to get out," she said, voice steadier than she felt. He tapped the lock button without looking back. The car's doors clicked. "Intersection up ahead is safer," he said, and eased his foot on the gas. The taxi rolled forward under the camera's eye with a quiet that didn't match the rain. On the other side of the plaza, the highway narrowed into what looked like a service road. No lane markings, only wet asphalt bordered by chain link and trees that leaned in, as if they were curious. The red of the taxi's taillights painted the rain into vertical threads. Maya swallowed and rehearsed the list of safe steps every city blog tells you. Share your location, call a friend on speaker, demand to stop at a populated place. She tried the first. The message spun and failed again. She opted for the third. "Please pull over at the next gas station," she said. 2 minutes, he replied, voice as even as an elevator announcement. "There is no gas station here," she said, then hated that the fear had crept into her tone. He didn't answer. The service road curved left where the fence buckled inward, then right along a line of unlit billboards whose blank faces looked like unmade beds in the dark. The rain found a steadier rhythm. Maya leaned closer to the window and caught her own reflection superimposed on the trees, but the girl in the glass seemed a half-second late to mirror her moves, as if the pane of glass had a memory it was slow to update. She tested it, raised her hand, and the hand in the window rose a blink later. "Did we Miss the turn? She tried, because sometimes a gentle lie makes people kinder. We're taking it, he said. The next corner offered a choice between a narrow bridge and a darker road that tilted down. It chose the darkness. The tires hissed over puddles. A single streetlight buzzed, then flickered out behind them. The dashboard clock still said 1:13. The radio still held its frozen word. Maya rested her palm against the cool door and felt the faint thrum of the engine. She pictured the office, her desk plant under the fluorescent glare. Her mug with the chipped remand, something simple and stubborn, sparked in her. This is wrong. Fix it. She slid her hand toward the door handle, testing it without a sound. Locked. She checked the window button. Dead. Sir, she said, and the steadiness came back. I need you to stop now. He nodded once, a small bow to no one, and said almost kindly, almost there. The problem with being almost anywhere is that it gives you no data at all. They drove deeper where the map turned gray and the street names thinned, and Maya realized she could no longer place the sound of the city under the rain. The usual collage distant music, a dog barked once, a late bus sighed, was missing. Only the engine's low hum and the whisper of water on asphalt remained, like the world had simplified itself to two noises to make room for something else. She studied the driver's posture. His shoulders were level, steady, almost formal, the posture of someone who had practiced looking calm where calm is currency. His hands didn't fidget on the wheel. His head never checked the rear view. He didn't clear his throat or sniff or shift. Human stillness is rarely that complete. Maya slid her phone into airplane mode and back, praying for a reset, then into camera, because cameras sometimes see what eyes miss. She angled the lens at the dash. The frame picked up the meter's red glow, the frozen 1:13, the fog's soft bloom on the edges of glass and a tiny glint where there should have been matte plastic. The screws on thermometer faceplate had been replaced with odd, dark fasteners notched in a way she didn't recognize, like they belonged to a kit you don't buy at a normal hardware store. She swallowed. I think we've gone too far south, she said evenly, as if suggesting a different playlist. No, he answered, but not unkindly, more like he was checking off a box labeled respond. We're almost there. The phrase had stopped being vague. It had become an incantation, a reason that did not explain. She thought about opening the door at the next rolling stop, but the locks had already told her their opinion. She tried a different tactic. My roommate's waiting outside. Could you call dispatch and let them know our ETA? A pause, then a soft, dispatch knows. The words didn't soothe. They rang metallic in the small cabin, and the rain seemed to agree, drumming harder for a dozen beats. Maya's reflection wavered in the window, half merged with the black trees. When she tilted her head, the head-in glass followed a heartbeat late again, as if the pain remembered her previous position, before it admitted the new one a delay too consistent to be accident. She pressed her thumbnail against the cold glass until it squeaked. The sound felt rude in the hush, like breaking etiquette at a wake. Where are we going? She asked finally. He adjusted nothing, not his speed, not his grip. To the address, he said. Your street's closed. For what? He breathed out. Work. Road work? She pushed. Another breath. Work, he repeated softer, and the wipers dragged twice before finding their rhythm again, like they had heard a word they didn't want to repeat. The road funneled under a low overpass where the ceiling felt an arm's length above the taxi roof, concrete sweating dark streaks down its ribs. Amber hazard lights blinked somewhere just ahead, not together like they should, but slightly out of sync, as if two ideas of time were trying to agree. The taxi slowed without the driver touching the brake hard enough to tilt her forward. Maya leaned into the aisle to see around his shoulder. Beyond the closest pillar, two sawhorses and a plastic barrier blocked the left half of the lane. No workers, no equipment, no truck idling, just the performance of closure. Detour? She offered carefully. We're taking it, he said, and slid right into a gap that looked too narrow, until the car fitted easily, like the space had been measured to their width. On the pillar, a torn paper notice clung wet to the concrete bled into blue ribs. Words no longer words, only the posture of words. When the hazard blink hit again, the reflection strobed across the windshield and turned the driver's silhouette into a flipbook, hands steady, chin forward, eyes unseen. Maya recognized the instinct to categorize danger into usable shapes: drunk, angry, distracted, and realized none fit. This was a driver doing a perfect impression of a driver. They emerged from the underpass into a low, wide yard of industrial lot shipping containers stacked too high behind limp chain-link fences, a trailer office dark, a vending machine glowing red and blue behind bars. In that cheap neon wash, she caught the license placard on the dash again. The name there, she tried to say it softly under her breath, to lodge it in memory. It slid away like a wet coin. She leaned closer and noticed a bubble caught under the laminate, as if the plastic film had been reapplied by a hand that hadn't done it in a hurry, but also hadn't cared whether air stayed trapped. The driver took a right that wasn't a street so much as space between fences. Gravel popped under the tires, then became smooth again too quickly. as if the gravel had agreed to play the part for only the first few seconds. The horizon lost its city shape entirely. No skyline, no promise of a bridge, only low roofs and black trees. I don't feel well, Maya said, lifting a tactic from the internet, trying to force a humane detour. I need to get out. He nodded once, a ceremonial empathy. Soon, he said. We don't stop here. Where do we stop? The question floated in the dark cabin like a balloon she wished would pop. Where it's safer, he said, which sounded less like an answer and more like a decision already made by someone who didn't live inside the car. He clicked the hazards on and nosed the taxi against a curb beside something Maya hadn't seen in years. A payphone alcove jutting from a brick wall, lit by a flickering fluorescent that painted the rain in pulses. The phone hung there like a relic in a museum no one visited. Dull metal scars where stickers had been scraped, a receiver black as a bruise. On instinct, she reached for her own phone and found Miracle a single bar, one thin promise. She stabbed her roommate's name, calling. It rang once, then the bar fell away. The call hung and failed, the screen returning to the home face with a shiver. You can use that, the driver said, chin tilting toward the payphone. She did not like that he knew what she had just attempted without looking. I don't have coins, she lied, though a handful sat in the pocket of her tote from a coffee shop tip jar. Operator will help, he said. It's safer from here. The phrase again. Safer than what? Than whom? She stared at the door lock button on her armrest still sunk. If I get out, will you wait? She asked, hearing her voice behave like someone negotiating, not someone deciding. Taxi doesn't leave a fare, he said, which fit both common sense and threat. She made herself exhale and cataloged the environment like a witness. A boarded window, a newspaper box with its glass smashed into teeth, a chain-link gate a dozen yards down with its padlock hanging open, weeds bright with rain like they'd been polished for a photograph. The fluorescent above the phone sizzled when drops hit its cracked shell. The hazards clicked inside the car loud enough to feel like time. She unhooked her seatbelt, tried the handle. The lock stayed down. Door, she said. The locks popped open with docile obedience. I'll stand right there, she said, pointing to the alcove so he could watch her. And she could watch him watching, and that strange idea comforted her, because it meant she still believed in a geometry where sight made rules. The rain felt colder outside than it had looked, the kind that sneaks through seams and asks you to surrender your warmth. She stepped under the light, lifted the receiver, and pressed it to her ear. A dial tone answered, steady and low, a relief it shouldn't have been. She dialed her own number first, because if it rang in her bag, she would know the world was still ordinary in at least one way. It didn't ring. The tone cut. A click slid into her ear, like someone else had lifted another receiver somewhere and joined. Maya, said a voice that sounded like hers if she had gone a week without sleep. Don't go back to the car. Her own name in her own register detonated every sensible script. Maya's mouth opened, closed. Who is this? She asked, but the breath behind the words fogged the receiver in a way that made the question look theatrical. You know, the voice said, and she hated that the phrase wormed into her bones like a memory of something she hadn't lived yet. She looked back at the taxi. The driver hadn't moved. Hazards pulsed. In the red blink, the condensation on the rear window looked like a rush of tiny bodies climbing upward, then pausing, then sliding back with each click. Listen, the voice said, strained as if speaking through clothesline twine. You've already been in the car longer than you think. I've been in the car 15 minutes, Maya countered automatically, because numbers are how you claw the ground when the floor tilts. Check, the voice said and went quiet. She glanced at her phone. 107. She glanced at the dashboard through the windshield. 113. She looked up at the mounted fluorescent. In its stutter, she counted 6 blinks, each exactly the same length, as if time here came in factory slices. What do you want me to do? She asked, because collaboration sometimes feels safer than defiance. Walk, the voice said. Straight ahead to the gate. Keep the driver in sight. Do not go left. Do not go right. Do not answer if he calls your name until you are touching the fence. And then, silence, except for the fluorescent's slow sizzle and the drumming of the hazards inside her ribs. No, Maya said, and the word surprised her. It landed with a weight she had been saving. If you're me, tell me something I don't tell anyone. A pause. Rain thickened along the lip of the receiver and ran down her wrist, cold as a coin. You keep a chipped mug at work, the voice said. Calm now. You rotate the chip to the other side so it doesn't show on video calls. You stopped drinking from it the day they fired Tom, and you don't know why. Maya pressed the receiver harder to her ear until her cartilage hurt. She had never told anyone any of that because none of it mattered to anyone. If I walk to the gate, she said, eyes still on the taxi, What happens? The voice inhaled, wet and shivering. You get a choice, it said. You don't like choices, but this one is better than the one you think you have. She kept the receiver at her ear because the sound of someone herself. Breathing had turned into the smallest rope. I'm walking, she said, and stepped out from the alcove into rain that felt newly purposeful, as if each drop had been assigned to a place on her coat. The taxi remained a shape with 4 pulses for a heart. The driver's head did not turn. The chain-link gate, 12 yards ahead, presented its simple geometry, diamonds and air, a lock that had learned to hang, hinges that looked tired even by night. Straight, the voice said softly. Maya obeyed and refused to look left or right because obedience can be a temporary tool when defiance would scatter you. Her shoes found the line of gravel where the asphalt surrendered. With each hazard blink, the world strobed between 2 truth-sweat silver, then black, wet silver, then black, and she timed her steps to land on the silver, as if the lithe seconds were the only ones that counted. Halfway to the gate, the receiver spat static, and then a small sound like cloth shifted, and she knew without being told that the driver had finally turned his head. Don't answer, the voice warned, but he hadn't spoken. He hadn't called her name. The certainty outran sight, and that disloyalty of senses angered her enough to help. What happens if I reach the fence? She whispered. You'll know, the voice said, and it was the first admission that felt human and not staged. She reached the gate. Up close, the padlock wasn't open after all. It was snapped shut around nothing, the loop embracing air where metal should have been, like a hand pretending to hold. Maya slid her fingers into the wire diamonds and felt the fence trembling not with wind, but with something like the hum of a long refrigerator domestic, steady, inhuman. Now what? She said, and finally allowed herself to look back. The taxi's hazard lights were off. The red pulses had stopped. The driver's silhouette looked the same and also wrong, an outline too crisp for glass, a cutout more than a man. Now you count, the voice said. Count from 107 to 1/1000 out loud. If the numbers do not change, you turn left and you run. The instructions scrambled and settled like a deck of cards squared on a table. Left where? She asked, but the line went dead. The dial tone didn't return. Only the hum in the wire and the new silence from the taxi remained, and in that silence she realized something she should have realized blocks ago. Cars breathe when they idle. Lights blink, fans whir, heaters whisper. This one was holding its breath. Maya gripped the wire fence until the diamonds imprinted themselves into her palms, grounding her to something physical in a world that had begun to trade physics for theater. The taxi sat behind her like a stage prop that hadn't been struck, its silhouette sharp against a fog too deliberate to be weather. The hazard lights had died. The engine had gone silent, but the car had not surrendered its shape. It waited. She remembered the voice telling her toe count, and she began. 107. 108. Her breath fogged between the numbers. At 111, her throat threatened to close, because the numbers were not seconds. They were landmarks she was being asked to pass without a map. At 113, the air itself seemed to resist, a pressure across her chest like an invisible hand suggesting she not finish the word. She forced it out anyway. 13. The fence vibrated once, hard enough to rattle her teeth. Behind her, the taxi door latch clicked, loud as a hammer on tile. She turned and saw the driver's side open, though no one had leaned out. The silhouette had not moved, yet the door gaped. Rain poured harder in the open interval, drumming the leather seats. Safe, she whispered, but to no one now because the phone receiver lay back in the alcove swinging like a pendulum. She realized too late she'd obeyed a voice without evidence it had earned her trust. Choices, it had said. Choices are only better if all exits lead somewhere. She let go of the fence and turned toward the service road, her sneakers splashing into shallow puddles that tasted of metal when mist caught her lips. The taxi's open door showed more black than the night deserved, a rectangle too dense, as if beyond the frame, no upholstery existed. The driver's figure remained in place, and that immobility turned monstrous. The longer someone doesn't move, the more your body insists they must not be alive. Yet alive was the only category that kept them dangerous. Maya forced her eyes to scan the edges of the lot. A vending machine's light hummed weak blue. A torn billboard sagged with rain. Weeds glistened bright as veins. Nothing moved, yet the silence had shape. A dome that stretched just beyond her, as though whatever owned the silence had followed the cab and brought its own rules. Almost there, the driver's voice said, not from the figure, not from the car, but thin and disembodied, a reverb from concrete walls. Her stomach folded into itself. The phrase was no longer direction, it was a spell designed to shrink her range of possibility. She picked the only rebellion she had left. She ran. Not a sprint's end, but a steady, defiant cadence toward the far edge of the lot where the fence bent open into brush. Rain clawed at her face. Her tote banged her hip like applause. Behind her, the taxi's dome light flicked on, and in that glow, the silhouette was gone. The seat was empty. Yet the open door remained, rain tumbling inside without resistance. A door with no one to claim it. She did not slow down to see if someone else would. The service road ended in a muddy spill that gave itself to trees too quickly, like the city had abandoned responsibility for this ground. She ducked through the torn fence and felt branches slap her wet sleeves, guiding her inward. The path wasn't paved, but it existed, tamped down just enough to prove feet had been here before. Whose? Why? She pushed harder, lungs burning, heartbeat matching the memory of hazard clicks. When she glanced back, she saw only the glow of the toll plaza lights, faint and false, like the promise of civilization painted on a curtain. She dug her phone out. Black screen. Dead. She thumbed the button again and again, until the mirror of her own face glared back. Mud sucked at her shoes. Roots snagged her ankles. Rain divided itself into drops that found only her. She began to talk out loud to force her breath steady. Keep going. Keep going. You'll reach a road. You'll reach a light. Someone's awake. Someone's home. Her own voice in the wet dark was both too loud and not enough. Then the forest gave her a gift or a joke. The sound of an engine. Faint, muffled, familiar. She slowed, heart vaulting, hope and dread twins. Through the trees, down a shallow slope, a narrow dirt lane revealed itself. At the far end of the lane, headlights glowed yellow. A taxi idled. Same make, same roof light. The silhouette inside sat waiting. The world folded neatly around her terror, tucking in corners until there was no space left for disbelief. Maya pressed herself against a tree, bark cold and wet against her spine, and made herself breathe slow enough to think. The taxi ahead purred like any other machine. The headlights painted mist into flat walls. The driver's head was turned slightly, angled down at something unseen, or maybe angled at nothing. Her rational brain begged for explanations. Maybe multiple cabs prowled this stretch. Maybe dispatch had sent another. Maybe the first driver had rerouted and arrived ahead by a road she hadn't seen. But explanations are a drug you feed yourself when the body already knows the truth. You are not in the grid anymore. You are in a pocket. Don't get in, she whispered to herself, the most obvious rule suddenly the most fragile. Yet the lane led only forward or back. Behind her was the plaza and the fence and a car that no longer breathed. Ahead was the duplicate. Rain drilled through leaves. Water ran cold into her collar. Her knees shook not from exhaustion, but from a growing certainty that standing still was itself a kind of consent. She scanned the ground and saw tire tracks in the mud single set, fresh, sharp. No entry tracks, only exits, which meant the cab had not arrived. It had always been waiting. The engine throbbed deeper for a second, as if it recognized recognition. She took one step back, ready to retreat into the trees, but a voice rose low and distinct from the lane, carried easily by the wet air. Not the driver's, hers. Maya, it called. Not urgent, not pleading, but confident. It was her own voice, sharpened by patience. The syllables of her name cleaved through every story she had rehearsed about safety, about how cities worked, about how logic was a ladder you could always climb out on. Her own voice outside her throat, waiting in a taxi that didn't need roads. She froze, because freezing sometimes buys time, and in that stillness the entire night pressed in like a closing book. The lane was no longer mud. It was a choice. The forest hummed with the refrigerator thrum of the fence. Behind her, no path back. Ahead, a cab that had been both behind and before. In her mind, she replayed the payphone command. Do not answer when he calls your name. But this wasn't he. This was she. It was her, already certain, already seated. She thought about the chipped mug at work, about rotating flaws until they faced away from the camera, about how much of survival is pretending not to see. Almost there, her double said again, softer this time as though volume were the only variable left to adjust. The door latch clicked open. Rain poured heavier, disguising nothing. Maya's body made a decision she didn't approve or deny. She stepped once toward the light. The lane swallowed her shadow, drew it longer, until it touched the cab. And when her hand lifted not willingly, not unwillingly toward the door, the headlights brightened, erasing the forest in front of her and the choices behind. The last thing she thought was not safe or help, but the simpler, older dread. Maybe I've already been inside. Maya buckled in and set her bag on her lap, the strap twisted around her wrist like an anchor. The radio was on, but hushed to the point of being felt more than heard, a soft murmur that might have been news or might have been faraway waves. The driver didn't smell like cigarettes or cologne. The cab smelled like damp fabric and old receipts. He made the first left without signaling, then the next two right turns with perfect timing, no heavy braking, no impatience at lights. Maya checked the dashboard out of habit, the meter digits read, steady. The temp gauge a notch warmer than she expected, the clock showing 1:12, then 1:13, only to realize her phone still thought it was 1:07. She shrugged it off. Sometimes devices disagree. She glanced at the license again. The plastic sleeve had condensation trapped behind it, the way picture frames fog when you bring them in from the cold. The name was readable now, but also not sticking in her head, like a word you know until someone asks you to define it. She tried conversation because silence in a small space can feel like a dare. "You been driving long tonight?" she asked. "A while," he said. That was it. Not rude, just a sentence that ended where it began. He didn't look at her in the rear view. In fact, the mirror was angled down just enough to show only the top of the back seat. Drivers tilted to watch their passengers. This one didn't, which should have been reassuring no watching, but instead it made her feel uncounted. Street after street slid by, and something subtle began to itch at her sense of direction. The city she knew had a grid that bent only where rivers demanded it. This route curled in gentle, not-quite circles, drifting toward neighborhoods she didn't recognize at this hour. Maya pulled up her map, typed her address, again, and the blue route line appeared, except the little dot for her car didn't sit on a street. It hovered slightly to the right, like the GPS was drunk. Then the dot corrected, then drifted again. Rain thickened. Wipers worked on a slow setting that perfectly matched the driver's breathing. "Shortcut?" she asked, forcing a smile into her voice. "Less traffic," he said, and the radio hiss deepened for a second like it agreed. The cab eased onto a ramp Maya had never taken before, shallow and silent, like a boat pushing off a dock. She craned her neck and saw the familiar skyline slide to the left, not behind them exactly, more like it had decided to wait while they tried something else. The road rose. The rain thickened. Sodium lights turned the mist into grainy halos, and each time the wipers swept, the world broke and reassembled. She texted her roommate on MyWay cab, 15 min, and watched as the message hung on sending, longer than it should have. At the crest of the ramp, the driver finally spoke more than 3 words. "Phones act up here," he said. "Towers are busy." It struck her as odd that he offered the explanation before she'd complained. "Happens a lot?" she said. Enough. The way he said it was not reassuring. The highway was wide open, the kind of emptiness that makes you feel like you must be doing something wrong to be alone in it. No trucks, no buses, a single pair of headlights far behind them that never seemed to change distance, like a star that followed only them. Maya watched the green exit signs appear, then blink away, but none of the names matched the route she would have chosen. "I think we should take Easton Avenue," she offered, careful to make it a suggestion rather than a correction. No answer. The next sign came and went. "Excuse me?" She tried again, then louder. "Sir?" He flicked the blinker on even though there were no cars to warn and slid into the right lane. "Almost there," he said. She looked at the meter and saw something new. A thin hairline crack in the plastic cover that hadn't been there blocks ago. Inside the crack, a bead of water had formed, impossible in a sealed device, catching and bending the red light into a tiny broken star. She told herself not to be dramatic. She told herself all devices fail strange in rain. She told herself a lot of things until they quieted the smarter part of her that whispered an older warning. You don't know this road, and the driver has no reason to be kind.